And with that, I'm going to come back to tonight's Science Cafe, The Eyes, A Window to the Social Brain. Katalin Gothard is a U of A researcher who specializes in research on oxytocin, sort of, um, and many other things. And we will be delighted to learn about her research and how the eyes function as a window to the social brain. So can we have a big round of applause for Dr. Gothard?
No? No. Okay. Is it not too loud? Your microphone was very loud. Doesn't bother you? Isn't it too loud? Okay. All right. So I am not working on oxytocin per se. I am a former neurosurgeon that escaped from the OR into the laboratory, and which I used to call the salt mines, because at the resident you always do the hard, long things and not necessarily the successful ones. But in the laboratory, I'm in charge, and I decided to work on things that I thought were the most common sources of human suffering, and that is emotional disorders and social disorders. So I work on emotion and social behavior, and oxytocin is one molecule that moderates and modulates and changes the way we relate to each other. And the reason why I'm going to talk about the eyes is going to become obvious. But first, I want to show you the animals that I work with. I'm absolutely fascinated by these animals. You know, that certain religions, you wake up in the morning and you have to say a prayer to God to be grateful for something. And if I were a religious person, I would wake up every morning and say a prayer for how grateful I am that I get to work with these absolutely fascinating, beautiful, intelligent animals, rhesus monkeys. So there's an island off of Puerto Rico called the island of Cayo Santiago, and this island has a colony of monkeys, of feral, wild, living animals. And I want to show you a video about these animals that was taken by one of our friends, a collaborator, to tell you a little bit about the social structure and the mental space occupied by social behavior in these animals. So,
And I'm going to hold the microphone
yeah.
up to the speaker on the computer.
Okay, so this is the island of Cayo Santiago, and there's no humans on this island, only a colony of monkeys. And these monkeys live in a hierarchical society, and the females that are shown here have very strong alliances, and they're born into their rank. They're like queen and princesses. The highest ranking female is the queen, and her daughters are the princesses. They're very good moms. They're incredibly doting on their kids, and they have very good ways of showing their care for each other. This is a grooming session when one of the princesses, who's the younger female, is groomed by her mom or her aunt or her older cousin. And grooming is a way the females show the sort of touching, loving relationship. This is the kindergarten where the females hang out together and they watch the kids. The kids have to learn very early in life what's their position in society, and they have a lot of fun. And they are about half a year old when they get to go away from their moms, and they have a lot of freedom, and there's kind of like it takes a village because the other females and the other cousins help out, but they're also promptly disciplined when something doesn't go exactly as it's supposed to go, and they break out of the hierarchy. There's also a community swimming pool, and there's a observant parent who are observing. These are little boys. This is a little boy with her mom. And the males actually are different than the females, because while the females stay together with their parents, with the female group, the males actually, before they reach puberty, they immigrate. They leave their mother's group and form these all-male societies where they learn to build alliances, they play. There's a lot of play, fight, and kind of pretend fight. And this is when they kind of learn to be monkeys. They learn to interact with each other. They learn to figure out how how to become real rhesus monkeys. And then they grow older, and when they grow older, they enter back into a group of females, and there they enter at the very lowest level of the society, and they have to suck up to the females in order to gain some status. Here is one that is trying to get a female to get some attention from her. And then they get a little bit more confident, and they start to threaten around and start to kind of throw their weight around, especially if they're big and beautiful. And they have beautiful faces. They're very attentive. They signal to each other their emotions and intentions with facial expressions. Here is the alpha male in his whole full obese glory. The alpha male is the one who's in charge. You can see him yawning here, which is not boredom, but an exposition, a showing of his canines. Here he is patrolling the troop. The job, of course, comes with duties. The crook tail means I'm the boss. And then sometimes the boss has to break up fights. Here's a fight where he's the alpha male, and he's trying to break up a fight between two females, and when he said it, he said it. He's respected, and he is feared by the group. So this is the end of the movie. We don't need a microphone anymore. So they have, do you recognize this kind of like a familiar sort of society? So the females run the show, and the males are sucking up to the females, but they also have duties, and they do the wars, they do the foraging, they provide the things, and the females form the social bonds in the society. So I was absolutely fascinating. What is it in their brain that is the same as what is in our brain? How can we learn from these animals how our social brain is set up? What are the neural bases of our behavior? How do we form alliances? Why do we hate? Why do we love? Why are we attached? Why we despise? Why are we here listening to somebody talking about a colony of macaques? So what I do is I look at the social. So you know what? There's a way of doing this better, like this, right? So, okay, you've seen this. So, yes. So the way I think about the social brain is kind of a hierarchical structure where we have some molecules at the very bottom. And these molecules are things like oxytocin or serotonin or dopamine, little chemicals that throughout the animal phyla, they kind of tend to serve the same purpose. And then these molecules are part of cells, and cells are specialized for certain things. And I'm not going to get to tell you because I only have 25 minutes, but some of the cells that are form our social brains are the so-called face cells. So in every brain that is here tonight, there are little cells that are responding to faces, and they're responding only when you see faces, and responding differently to different faces. So these are our cells that are specialized for social behavior. And then these cells form circuits, and they're distributed across the brain, and they're allowing the brain to make other kinds of computation based on cells of faces, based on reward, based on expectations, based on things that we know about social behavior. And then, of course, these circuits lead to behavior, things that are extraordinary and mysterious, but we have to start from the molecules. So I'm going to start with the molecules, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about serotonin, mostly as a contrast to oxytocin. Even though the title of my talk is Oxytocin, I would like you to sort of compare and contrast two molecules. So serotonin is an extremely old molecule that it's present in the brain of even invertebrates. And let me show you the kind of behaviors that the serotonin supports. So it's in the brain of fruit flies that are competing for food and pushing the males away from the females, and in lobsters and crustaceans. And actually, they have to do something with our sense of being winners or losers in a situation. So lobsters have these big claws, and they fight for status, and they fight for territory, and they fight for things that animals fight for, but they don't quite destroy each other. One of those claws could take off the head of another one, so they don't do a lot of damage to each other. They just show each other the claws, and the one with the biggest claws is the winner. And the one with the smaller claws is the loser. And the loser knows that he's the loser. Every time he's encountering the winner, he politely gets out of the way. So he has memory for that. Now, if you give them a little Prozac, and Prozac is the serotonin reuptake inhibitor, it's the drug that increases the availability of serotonin in our brain. You can infuse that with a little tube, because these guys are in the water, so it's not an easy experiment. You have to put a tube in the lobster's brain, and then through the tube put a little Prozac in the brain of the loser's lobster, and the loser lobster's brain. So what do you think the loser lobster will go? I think I'm going to go up against that bastard, see whether he's going to win again. Completely forgets that he's the loser. And he is actually challenging the winner. It's as though he forgets his status and forgets, because somehow that battle between the loser and the winner ended up decreasing the amount of serotonin in the brain of the loser. Well, it turns out that this is not true only for lobsters. This is actually true for a lot of animals, including us. So the amount of serotonin that we have in our brain correlates with the status that we claim for ourselves, and the social status that we believe that we should occupy, and we do work to take that social status. Actually, it's even more interesting than this. Look at this. Each of us have 2 genes for a serotonin transporter, a protein that makes serotonin available for the brain cells. And it comes in 2 copies, one from the mother, one from the father. And we can have 2 short copies, 2 long copies, or a short copy and a long copy. And that in itself is going to be predictive about what kind of emotional person you are. So if you have 2 short copies, you're a vulnerable person, emotionally vulnerable. And that means that if something bad happens, disease, death, divorce, lose your job, something really traumatic happens, this person who has the 2 short copies are going to be unable to pull themselves up by their shoestrings and resiliently, self-sufficiently bounce back into a normal emotional life. These are the people who will need therapy, who will need drugs, because when life challenges them, they can't conjure up the resources to deal with it. These people are like the orchids that require a hothouse to bloom. But when they have the hothouse and when they're protected, these people are extraordinarily creative. They're extraordinarily sensitive. They are the poets and the composers. They're vulnerable, but in some way beautiful, just like the orchids. If you have 2 long copies, you are the dandelion that grows in the crack of the sidewalk. Nothing will defeat you. There are such people, I'm sure you know such people, that, SHIT happens, but then they bounce back and they find a way to overcome these challenges. These are the people who will undergo depression and they will have feelings, but they say, tomorrow is another day. Maybe I'll go up against that winner. So these are the dandelion people. But most of us have a long copy and a short copy. And this is the very interesting part. So you would think if you have a short copy and a long copy, you're a mixture of the 2. But actually, no. It depends on your relationship with your mother. If your mother was a high-ranking, emotionally stable, self-sufficient, well-established, emotionally content person, even if you have a short copy, you're going to turn into a dandelion. But if your mother in the first year of your life was hesitant, first-time mother, socio-economical challenges, marital problems, not quite self-sufficient, not quite mature, not quite ready to take up this challenge, you're going to turn out to be an orchid. And this has been proven in rhesus monkeys, because rhesus monkeys and humans are the only two species that have this variation of short and long copies. Chimpanzees and orangutans and all those other monkeys that you see in the zoo, they don't have that. Only humans and monkeys, and rhesus monkeys, and they could take these monkeys that had a short and a long copy, and in the first day of life, they gave these monkeys to a mother who was a strong, sort of reassured, emotionally stable mother, or to a weaker mother, and they could differentiate the genes, the nurture from nature, and it turns out that this, in this case, is truly a true combination of your genotype and your mother's nurturing style. So that's sort of the dandelion and the orchid story about serotonin. So now let's go into oxytocin. Oxytocin is the hormone of reproduction. It has a lot to do with sex. Normally, we know about oxytocin because oxytocin levels induce the uterine contractions during birth, and oxytocin are causing the contraction of some cells that lead to milk letdown during nursing. So it was thought that this is a very female hormone, and it has to do with the mother-infant interactions and the bonding between the mom and the newborn. But it turns out that the male brain contains a lot of oxytocin. Contains a lot of oxytocin, and you don't have to be engaged in any kind of sexual or reproductive behavior to have a lot of oxytocin released in your brain. It turns out that oxytocin is released in all kind of pro-social, warm, physical, or verbal approach situation when we relate to each other, when we send positive, nurturing, reassuring signals to each other. This is so important because trust and the ability to empathize with somebody depends on the level of oxytocin that we have in our brain. So they took a bunch of people from Wall Street, traders from Wall Street, and they made them believe that they're actually doing real trades. It was an experiment. They knew that they're going to be part of the experiment, but they did what they knew how to do: sell and buy and trade stocks and bonds. And half of them got oxytocin. And it turns out, and these were all males, not that females cannot be traders, they just wanted to keep the experiment clean. They were all males. And it turns out that they did poorer when they were under oxytocin, because that cutthroat competition, that undercutting of the other, was eliminated by oxytocin. They trusted more. They wanted others to win too. They didn't want to be the winner takes all. Turns out that children with autism who have very poor social skills, that don't recognize faces, that don't recognize others, we cannot treat these kids. We don't know what to do with them. But when you you pulverize in their nose oxytocin, all of a sudden, they start to see other people as people and not as objects. So it was fascinating because it is a very interesting drug. Now, it's not a complete love drug. It's not like we need to just put it in the air conditioner and we will be a nice human society. But it sort of increases your vigilance and attention to the social stimuli. And I was very curious, what is it doing? How could we use this? How could we use this in people who have social deficits? And the reason why social deficits are so important in my book is that we have these psychiatric disorders. And I believe personally that no suffering, and as a physician I have seen the whole gamut of human suffering, cancer and diabetes and strokes and heart attacks and you name it, infectious diseases. Nothing can make us suffer as profoundly as our own mind can make us suffer. No pain compares to the emotional and mental pain. You can't take a pill. You can't escape from your own mind. And so I was very interested in the social aspects of behavior of these patients, because not only that these patients are completely miserable in the confines of their abnormal mind, but they are inevitably unable to relate to others. So not only that they're vulnerable and they're lonely and they're miserable, but they can't reach out to others. They can't connect. So one of the hallmarks of severe psychiatric mental disorder is the isolation of the patient. They can't reach out. They can't send the signals for others to reach out to them. So I was wondering whether oxytocin could help these patients, whether this would be a way of improving, even if it's just a little bit, their ability to relate to their caretakers or to relate to their families. So what I did is I took my monkeys and I had them watch videos of other monkeys. And I tracked their eyes of what they're looking at when they look at these videos and how do they relate to these videos. And now I'm doing experiments or actually put them face to face, not just on a video, but you have to start somewhere. And it turns out that in a lot of psychiatric disorders, when people interact, the patient interacts with other people, they don't look at the eyes. But all normal people, when we look at a picture or we look at a video or we look at a live person, 50 to 70% of the time we spend looking at the eyes, because the eyes contain so much information about the mental state and the intentions of the other person. This is the place to watch. But autistic children, schizophrenic patients, people with social phobia, people with mental, with depression, with manic depressive disorders, they don't look at the eyes. And I wanted to see, how do monkeys look at the eyes? And I did these experiments, and the outcome, at least to me, was absolutely beautiful, because this is what we found. So before I go to the eyes, I just want to say that this oxytocin is present in the brain of a lot of creatures, not only of monkeys and humans, a lot of animals like voles, for example. These are little rodents, and they come in two versions, mountain voles and prairie voles. And the prairie voles are monogamous. The female and the male mate, and they meet and they mate for 5, 6, 7 times during the 24-hour period, and then they're bonded and completely monogamous for the rest of their life. They're like Catholics or Mormons or whatever have you. They don't cheat. They don't cheat. And we know that animals cheat, even the ones that are pair bonded cheat, because you can do the paternity test and you see that the love dove, and so each eggs come from a different father. But with the voles, they don't cheat. We know that they're truly monogamous. And you look at another species, the mountain voles, and the mountain voles are completely promiscuous. They mate, then they have either serial monogamy or complete polygyny. They're completely promiscuous. And people wanted to find out why. What's the difference between the prairie voles and the mountain voles? And it turns out that it was oxytocin. So if you put oxytocin in the brain of a mountain vole while he's mating with the partner, it's going to turn monogamous, just like a prairie vole. Now, ladies, no, doesn't work like that. You can't just give them oxytocin. But it was a nice idea. So now we're going to go to here I'm showing you the autistic child that benefits from oxytocin. And then I wanted to tell you before my experiment that oxytocin is released in the brain of everybody. And it's released when we have close, loving, caring physical contacts. It doesn't have to be sexual. It's just good, loving, reassuring touch, as it's shown here. And the part that I like the most about the oxytocin literature, that you don't even need another human being, you just need a dog. And hugging and loving your dog for 2 to 4 minutes releases in the brain of a dog owner as much oxytocin as much is released in the brain of a lactating mother. And the best part of the story is that the dog has oxytocin increases too. So it's not a surprise, because they are such incredible animals. For 10 million years, we have cohabitated. We changed the dogs as much as they changed us. So it's no surprise that they make eye contact with us, that they want to cuddle, that they want to be touched, and then a couple of minutes of cuddling and touching and loving your dog, it's actually good for your health. It turns out that oxytocin reduces the bad effects of stress hormones. It increases your ability to cope with chemotherapy or radiation if you have cancer. I am not a practicing physician, but I can tell you that there's nothing as good for your mental health and stress life as an animal. An animal that you can cuddle, an animal that requires caring, an animal that is never going to complain, never is going to say, don't call me mom, is always going to be there, is going to be always be happy for the same food that you serve him or her every day, and is always going to be happy to see you, and is always going to come to you grateful. It's almost like, how could we create such a creature? How could nature create such a wonderful creature as a dog? So that's sort of a little parenthesis in the oxytocin story. And now I'm getting back to my experiment where I had videos of monkeys and other monkeys watched these videos, and I looked at the pattern of scanning these videos. Where did they look? And I give them oxytocin, and without oxytocin, they looked all over the place of the face of the other monkey, including the eyes. But when we gave the monkeys oxytocin, there was a very powerful bias towards looking at the eyes. All of a sudden, vroom, they became very interested in where is that other monkey looking? Is he looking back at me? Is he making eye contact? So I wanted to know what is the importance of looking at the eyes between these monkeys. And here's a video of a very adorable female monkey. And on top of the video, you will see this yellow line. And that yellow line indicates where the viewer monkey who's looking at this video is looking. And these are the eye movements of the viewer monkey. So the viewer monkey looked at the eye of this female and looked in the same direction in which that female looks. This is called gaze following. And we do it all the time. If I sat here and all of a sudden appeared confused and started to look out there and look out there, eventually you guys would look up there too, because you would take the cue from me that there's something interesting to see there, and you're going to look up there too. So this is called gaze following. And this is a social skill. This is an elemental little building block of social behavior. It's so important that the time when a baby starts to do gaze following, usually 4 to 6 months, it's the best and only predictor of when verbal behavior will appear. We know when gaze following appeared, we had a couple of months, and we'll know that the baby is going to start to talk and say things at a certain time. If gaze following is delayed, verbal behavior and other kinds of behaviors are also delayed. So I want to show you this video. No, we don't need a mic. So there's the little female. She's just hanging out. Here's the eyes of the viewer monkey, and bing, there he does the gaze following. So, and then sometimes he looks away. The monkeys were not rewarded. They were not taught to look. They looked if they wanted. If they didn't want to look, they didn't look. So I quantified these gaze following saccades because this is a very meaningful behavior. I look at Andrea's eyes. I look at where Andrea is looking. Don't look at me. Look at somebody else. And then I'm going to look there, right? So it's kind of, we're cueing each other what to pay attention to. So I quantified this, and this is what I got. So here is the experiment. This monkey is watching 3 times the same video. Then he's getting this pediatric nebulizer and he's inhaling oxytocin, and he's watching the same video 4 more times. And I take the video and I look at the frame of the video where the viewer monkey made a gaze following saccade. So the viewer monkey watched this video 3 times. 2 of the 3 times he did this gaze following saccade before the oxytocin. 3 out of 4 times he did the gaze following saccade after the oxytocin. There's another monkey. This is monkey Ridge. This is monkey Ram. Ram gaze followed only once in the videos that preceded the oxytocin inhalation, but gaze followed all 4 times after he received oxytocin. And so I have data from another movie and another movie and the other movie, and the bottom line of this experiment is that when you give intranasally oxytocin to male monkeys, they increase the probability of gaze following. They're more interested in where another monkey is looking, and they do this gaze following eye movement, which is a fundamental, elemental social behavior. So we do improve and enhance social behavior in normal males with oxytocin. So now, I wanted to know where in the brain are the areas that care about looking at faces and looking at the eyes. So you can take a monkey and you can put them in an MRI machine. This is a CT scanner. I just didn't get a good picture of the MRI machine. But you can put the monkey in there and show the monkey a bunch of images, just the way you do with humans. And you can measure the increase of blood flow, which is a proxy for neural activity. Where does the increase of blood flow happen? And it turns out that the blood flow increases in the amygdala. This is my absolute favorite structure of the brain. This is the part of the brain that takes information, everything that happens in the outside world, and also everything that happens in the internal world, the feelings from our body, and evaluates it for its emotional significance. It tells you whether this is good, bad, or neutral. And based on this evaluation, it engages the rest of the body in behaviors. If it's good, you're going to go for it. If it's bad, you're going to run away from it. If it's neutral, you're going to do nothing. But no matter what your choice of behavior is, your internal organs, your heart, your blood pressure, your breathing, your skin temperature, everything has to support this choice. And this is the job of the amygdala, to figure out how you feel about something and what you're going to do about something, and how it's going to enlist your internal organs to support your choice of behavior. So it turns out that the amygdala is the primary place in the monkey brain and in the human brain too, where the faces are processed. So now that we know where they are processed, we can take these very fine electrodes. This is an electrode, and this is a strand of my hair, just to give you a feel for how fine these things are. And I'm a trained neurosurgeon. I know how to do this without any pain. I can put these electrodes without any perception into the monkey's brain, into the amygdala, and I can listen in to what the individual brain cells do when the monkey is looking at another monkey, when he's interacting with another monkey. And what it comes out like, it's something like this. It sounds like this. Yeah, can you come? Can you hear that? This is not static electricity. This is the song of a single brain cell in a monkey's brain who's looking at a picture. This is the most beautiful song that can elate me. So we can interpret these songs, and you can listen into these cells in the brain, and you can imagine the brain being a big symphonic orchestra. And they have violins and cellos and French horns and basses and trumpets and drums, and each type of cells does its own little music, and together they make this gorgeous symphony that is our mental life. And it's an absolute privilege to be able to put these electrodes in these brains and listen in. And it's not part of my talk, but I'm going to tell you that I started a collaboration with a neurosurgeon at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. And I convinced this neurosurgeon to put the electrodes in the human amygdala and to get the humans do exactly the same experiments that I do with our monkeys. And ladies and gentlemen, the news is we're exactly the same, but humans are slower. About a tenth of a second, 100 milliseconds, we're slower than the monkeys. The monkeys figure out and extract the information a little faster. So now I want to show you the culmination of these experiments, because through the oxytocin and through these experiments where we looked at how does the brain respond to how we look at each other, we actually discovered something. Really, it's really a true discovery. Nobody knew that such things exist. And these are a set of cells in the amygdala that respond to the eyes. So what I will show you now is another video, and Shepard, please come with your, or Reed. Reed is your first name, right? Shepard is your first name. Okay, so please come with the video. So what you're going to see, this is a video of a monkey. The green dot is the location of the gaze of the viewer monkey, and you will hear the cell. And your job is to decide whether I was right or wrong, that that cell was active and responded when the monkey was looking at the eye of the other monkey. Do you believe it? You want to see it once more? I'll show you something better. So here's a version of these cells. So did you see that? Did you hear it? It's the eye contact. So tell me, what is in our whole entire everyday human life more arousing, more emotionally telling, more connecting, more meaningful than eye contact? And this structure of the brain, the amygdala, contains neurons that are specialized to tell the rest of the brain, I'm engaged in eye contact with another. And these are the cells that are responding to oxytocin. This signal coming from these eye cells and the face cells in the amygdala are the ones that are receiving and benefiting from this enhancement of social behavior by oxytocin. So oxytocin may be only one molecule. There may be other molecules out there. It may not even be all about chemistry. But the beauty of this is that feeling of connectedness, that feeling of openness, of intimacy, of arousal that we experience when we look at each other's eyes is coming from these cells that were there in the brain, nobody knew about them, and that are the main beneficiaries of oxytocin. So I'll stop here, and I like to thank the people who actually did this work in my lab, my two graduate students, Philip Putnam and Clayton Mosier, and my wonderful technician, Priska Zimmerman, and our work has been funded by the National Institute of Mental Health. Thank you.